All right, great. So I'm Chris Lee Messer, and I'm here to kind of follow up on the promise that Lindsay was just describing for drug repurposing for nortriptyline. And it pretty much follows directly from what Juliet Knowles was talking about earlier today. The motivation for this trial is what I'm going to talk about first. I think that'll be pretty clear. And then I'll talk about nortriptyline as a clinically used drug so that everyone can be familiar with what the challenges are for using it in a clinical trial. And then I'll briefly talk about a vision for how clinical trials, I hope, will be able to go some in the future, maybe partially with this trial. And then the actual plan for the trial. So hopefully I'll not be talking too long on the first part so I can get to that part. So finally, as you've already heard, there's a lot of motivation for using nortriptyline. It's one of these top candidates that's shown up from the screening that the SRF and Rarebase have done. It's an FDA-approved drug, and preliminary data shows that it can rescue this eye phenotype that Clement was just talking about. And it can also preliminary indications that in human iPSC-derived neurons, they can also alter function and increase expression. So Juliet described in greater detail the work she's doing to characterize its effects in mice and to see if it's affecting social behaviors and seizures or sleep. And those studies are ongoing, but are intriguing so far. So we're really excited about this. And as Lindsay mentioned, we're not going to go the typical method. We're not going to spend the extra 6 years developing this and getting all the clinical drugs, preclinical information before we go forward, because we have a drug that's already approved. And that's nortriptyline. It's been approved since 1964 by the FDA. And it's been also approved for adolescents, but not children as of yet. A related drug, amitriptyline, actually has this as one of its metabolites, and that one is approved in younger people as well. It's very commonly used in adults and children. Originally, it was developed for depression, and that's where its FDA indication comes from. But since the advent of Prozac and other newer generation SSRIs, it's mostly used for chronic pain, migraines, and actually a large number of other indications off-label. It does many, many things. So that's one of the interesting things about some of these older drugs, is that in addition to its original impact as antihistaminergic, or your typical antihistamine, it was found that it also upregulates the inhibits the reuptake of serotonin and norepinephrine, and it was believed that that was the mechanism for how it affects depression. But it also inhibits sodium channels, calcium channels, acetylcholine and 5-hydroxytryptamine. So it's a very, what we call a dirty drug, in the sense of that it has many effects in many parts of the nervous system. The other thing that's very interesting about it is that its effect on, as an antidepressant, like many other antidepressants, starts only weeks after you start the medication. So while the mechanisms I was just mentioning about sodium channels and its serotonin reuptake inhibition starts right away, the long-term effects on the brain are really somewhat mysterious still. It's some sort of network effect or long-term homeostatic effect that we don't completely understand. And this is also true for its effects for pain too. The other things to know about it is that it's metabolized by the liver, and so that 2D6 pathway is very important for it, and that metabolism is highly variable between different patients, up to 5-fold. So it's the other thing that's fun about it is it gets you a chance to read a lot of 70s and 80s literature. So I've been really like having a 70s flashback moment for a while. The great news is that it seems to be generally safe in adults and children. And the main issue in terms of absolute safety is about cardiac toxicity. So it's definitely highly toxic in overdose. For example, levels of 500 are known to be very bad and cause asystole, Torsades de Pont. But it appears to put people at risk if they also have a tendency towards QT shortening, other types of cardiac disease, if they're older, or if they are taking other drugs that have overlapping side effects. Getting out of the safety issues, it also has a lot of side effects that can impact whether or not it's tolerable. So it can cause dry mouth and dry skin, constipation. It can cause confusion and delirium in some people. It can lower your blood pressure, although not as much as amitriptyline, and cause you to have fainting when you stand up. It can also cause agitation or mood changes or restlessness. And if you have been taking it for a while, especially at higher doses, you can get a withdrawal effect like many other antidepressants. So there are some other rare things, for example, like hyponatremia, but those are the main things that I think as a parent that I would be most concerned about. Typical dosing for depression is usually a little higher, with adults taking, say, 25 milligrams a day and then going up to 2 to 3 times a day at 50 to 150 milligrams typically. Children, a lower dose, 10 milligrams per day. Again, for pain, even lower doses, 0.2 milligrams per kilogram per day, up to 2 milligrams per kilogram per day. It's easy. It's still available. Anyone can prescribe it who has a license. And it comes in capsule forms and a liquid formulation. And in general, we have a lot of experience with using it in our hospital, even among very sick kids, because of the issues with chronic pain that many of them have. And it's not unusual for me to see patients who have already tried it because of their migraines as a child neurologist. There are some challenges, though. As I already mentioned, it can have a lot of these side effects. And for Syngap patients especially, and I think anyone with autism, it's very difficult to change anything, especially anything that's going to affect other parts of your body or affect your mood. And so unlike what we like for a clinical trial where we'd like to bam, get right up to the clinically relevant dose, it's really something where we have to follow the old adage of start low and go slow. And this is in direct opposition to the principles of having a successful trial because it makes it so we have to go longer. But we have come up with some slow and slower protocols to try to address this. So here I've basically taken the slower pain protocol and then half that. And we also think we can authorize the local doctors to use their judgment about these things. Again, to give you an idea, if we take the slowest of these protocols, that makes it 20 weeks to get to 2 milligrams per kilogram per day. So that's talking about 4 to 6 month trial with whatever measures we're using. If more people can take the faster ones, some people might finish more quickly. Second challenge is this issue with nortriptyline metabolism. So on the right, I have a graph from Geller's work in 1985, where what she did is, you don't have to read the exact details, but basically the axis on the bottom is the drug level after a single dose, and the drug level on the left side, the axis on the right, the left is the drug level after taking the medicine for a week. Every single patient took exactly the same dose. And they're all between 5 and 9. So you can see there's just this very large range in terms of how far the points ranged, both across the X and the Y axis. So that's that 5-fold difference. And we would like to see in any trial, we'd like to see a dose related effect in order to be convinced of its efficacy. And if we're giving the same dose to different people, but they have 3 times the levels in one person than another, it's going to be very difficult to judge this. So we do think we can get high sensitivity assays, but these are not the ones that are typically available, like from Mayo or your local lab. We'll need more sensitive assays, and we're addressing that by looking at some collaborations to get those those samples. So the good news summary is that nortriptyline, it's got a lot of pros. It's cheap, very inexpensive. It's FDA approved, so it's already available for people to use and try. And we have many years of clinical experience using it safely. The challenges that we mentioned that are involved with nortriptyline can be overcome. So great, we're all set for our trial. But there's one other issue, which Lindsay already has addressed, which is that similar to many other drug repurposing efforts, there's not a pharmaceutical company that's looking to make millions or billions of dollars off this medication. We, like all rare diseases, there's a small market, and this is already a paid-for drug that's off of patent. And so the typical clinical study, when I went and asked, like, oh, how much does one cost at Stanford, they'd say $300,000 or $400,000. So just to pause a second, I took that number in and I looked at Mike, and he's like, nah. And I thought, well, what would be my vision of how clinical trials could occur? And my model for this is to look in your pocket, and I have an exercise app that makes it so that it tells me what to do, and I have Duolingo. So why don't we have Duolingo for clinical trials? Why don't we have Duolingo for Syngap? A lot of the efforts that go to making it so you do a clinical trial is managing it, making sure that everyone's being followed up, everyone's being reminded, all these surveys are done on time, you've completed them validly. And I think that a lot of those things can be addressed with sort of modern technologies. I spent a bit of time as a programmer for a while in earlier life and ran websites and things like that. And I know that there's just a lot of things that you can program into your app or your website that can help people manage these things. And so I at least have a dream, a vision that at some point you would be able to just download the clinical trial for the app for this, take it to your doctor, talk to them and say, I'd like to do this. They would also download the app and say, hey, I'd like to register as a local doctor to do this. And we could start a decentralized trial. They could do the prescriptions, and then you'd get daily reminders to do your 5 minutes of logging for the day. Maybe it would be one of the assays that was talked about earlier in terms of assessing their sleep or marking what in their seizure diary if they had a seizure. Periodically, we would mail you things like nasal swabs or maybe an EEG device and be able to get regular measurements. And having this all coordinated via this web service instead of having everyone fly to our clinic. So that's the dream. I'll just pause there. But the hope is that that would make it more available. It would make it so that our outreach is greater and potentially to other countries if we can just get things translated for them. So here's our plan for a clinical trial of nortriptyline as it stands. So imagine it in 2 stages. The first stage is, as Lindsay was saying, we're in the pilot trial stage. So this is where people will volunteer to enter this pilot stage. And the primary goal for this is going to be to establish the safety and the tolerability of nortriptyline in Syngap patients. We're trying to find the right dose and the right protocol for getting to that dose, see if that slow or slower protocol works for people. We'd like to assess the practicality of these tools, which hopefully some of them are new tools for the administration and monitoring of the trial. And then also deploy all these great measures that people have come out with at scale to assess how people are responding. And that's how we're going to get to stage 2, which is where we actually can identify a primary outcome. From the preclinical data, maybe it's going to be something that's social related, or maybe it's going to be behavioral, or maybe it's going to be something to do with attention. But it's, as mentioned, it's probably not going to be seizures. So as mentioned, we're going to assess these different protocols, look at adverse events, gather this data. With idea of being it's a real world study. So once people have reached their highest tolerable dose, then with their physician locally, they'll choose their optimal dose, and then we'll be able to measure things as we have titrated up to that and at that optimal dose. Just as a quick reminder, we know that we need to assess all these different wide spectrum of problems that occur for our patients with Syngap. And Thomas Fraser has offered to work with us in terms of using his net assessment tools. So again, these are ones where they can be done at scale and they can be hooked up to your app, or we've also talked about having it so the app can help send you to the AI Measures website so you can do these. Just as a quick, like super broad, like these are all the things that are currently included in the net assessment. So it includes a large number of clinical surveys to assess sleep, mood, ADHD symptoms, ones for both parents, caregivers, and also for clinicians. And then he also has ones that are direct measures using a laptop or tablet that can track gaze and have you do different tests of social attention, visual exploration. The thing that I think it lacks is it doesn't have great motor assessment, so we're still looking for that. And of course, we'd be happy to add other things and swap things out if one of these validated scores makes sense. Other things that are going on, this is somewhat repeating information, but again, we're going to have a seizure diary, these net assessments. We'll have a cardiac screening procedure following roughly the Dutch guidelines. And we'll do that in combination with advice from some psychiatrists who have done this. We'll have the high sensitivity drug monitoring. We're going to try to get EEG at the beginning, at the end, at the optimal dosing stage, possibly via remote company. And then we're loving, to all the things that we've heard today, in terms of maybe we can get expression testing via nasal swabs. Maybe we can get a wearable EEG or an actimetry for sleep. Nasal nitric oxide I just learned about today. I mean, that would be amazing. And again, this is to identify, to see if there's a biomarker that we can follow. So this is sort of the details. So what I've been doing is sitting in front of the IND application that I'm preparing for Nortriptyline and putting each part of this protocol in and then running against other people. So our goal is to get to that point where at least we could apply for it. It's not absolutely necessary, I know, for our patients, but that's, by keeping that goal in mind, that's the reason why we're going in this direction. So I'm going to just mention just these things. Inclusion criteria are very broad. We're going to attempt to try it to age 2 and above, and just a genetically verified diagnosis of Syngap. Here's our exclusion criteria that we're looking at: allergies, pregnancy, breastfeeding, and history, the cardiac issues. Also, we want you to have washed out of any previous investigational drugs. So, in terms of the resources we need, we're going to make sure that we're going to need a resource coordinator to answer questions, because we still need in-person, attention to this. We're going to have a safety monitor who will review the study after every third enrollment. We're going to need all those local doctors to, be prescribing the medicine and watching their patients. And then we're going to need a trained person to run these high sensitivity lab tests, probably. And of course, the researchers, and we'll need a programmer if we're going to try to get to this, idealized vision of how a clinical study can run. So that's my story. I want to thank everyone who's given me advice, all these people here, everyone in the Knowles lab, and really appreciate everything. So in summary, it looks like Nortriptyline looks very practical to do, and I think we can do it within a budget that's reasonable. We plan to start this pilot study. Looks like, as though right now, talking to Thomas Fraser, that his website will be ready to do these assessments in the first half of 2025. And finally, of course, if there's any families or doctors who are interested, then please send me an email. And once we have our website up, I'll let you know.